Hello, my name is Eric Walker-Rawson, and this is Discussing New Approaches, the thought leadership series where we delve into anything strategy, data, tech, AI, and everything in between. And today I'm joined by Ian Thomas, who's had 25 years of experience in data. And today we're going to be talking about AI and the C-suite. So this is actually a follow-up to Ian's post that he's made on his own personal blog, The Rumble in the AI Jungle, which I do recommend to everyone listening to go and read. I'll put a link in the description. But there are lots of other great posts on there, and they're interesting with dashes of humour, which I always appreciate. So before we jump in, Ian, did you want to briefly take us through some of the highlights of your career so the audience knows a little bit more about you and your work?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me on, Eric. It's great to be here. So as you say, I've been working in the data industry for about 25 years. Got into it by joining a data technology startup in London, innovating in web analytics back when that was very new in the early 2000s. And then that took me to a very successful period at Microsoft, working in the headquarters in Redmond in the US, supporting various parts of Microsoft with very large scale data projects, including Microsoft Advertising, Microsoft Consumer Marketing Organization, and the Bing team, which is now the same team that's bringing the world Copilot and Microsoft's AI stack. And then since returning to the UK in 2019, I am providing interim and project-based CDO consulting services. So I help organizations figure out how their data functions should function and how they should relate to the rest of the organization, how they can build good teams, good platforms, take care of their data, and unlock value through um, uh, innovative projects like AI.
Amazing. What are some of the companies that you've worked with in that sort of consulting period, of interest?
So it's big and small, some growth stage companies in the gaming sector, big companies like Aviva, Sony, Lloyds Bank, Shell. So some of the biggest companies here in the UK. So a real range of clients I've worked with.
Amazing. Do you think there are any particularly good examples from the companies that you've worked with who are doing it, right or sort of interesting approaches?
Well, we were pretty innovative during my time at Microsoft, for example, in the marketing work that we were doing. Uh, One of the big challenges, if you have a large customer base, of course, is to keep that customer base engaged and to deliver them the information about the services and products that they are going to are going to want to buy or to keep their subscriptions going. And for example, with the Xbox team, so we did some really interesting work around AI-based campaign optimization and experimentation within a campaign context. So using the entire audience base as a kind of experimentation environment, testing out different kinds of creative and timing and so on, and using that to optimize the campaigns and driving really significant upside value from that work, which people think of as kind of commonplace now, but when we were doing it just a few years ago, that was the cutting edge of AI. So it's interesting to see how the conversation moves along every time something new is invented in the field.
Which seems to be happening at an increasingly quickened pace at the moment. So the industry is moving quite fast. But so to bring it into our first question and aligning it to the topic, so I think it'd be quite good to define the role of the CDO first within a business. So I suppose, in your opinion, what are organisations usually trying to achieve by putting a CDO in place?
Yeah, well, if most organizations knew what they were trying to achieve by putting a CDO in place, I think the world would be a much easier place for CDOs. It's one of the common challenges of the role is that its success criteria are poorly defined, which is ironic because one of the things that senior data people are very good at, or meant to be very good at, is helping to define success criteria and measurement and so on for the businesses that they're supporting. typically many organizations historically have brought CDOs in for things like sort of governance and privacy type reasons, particularly in the wake of GDPR, which obviously is a few years in the rearview mirror now. I think that the better reason to have a CDO is to have somebody who really champions the upside value that data can bring within the organization. It's a challenging role because the CDO needs to be able to um, both run detailed execution across a range of activities to do with running a data team and a data platform and create a valuable service for the organization. So they have to kind of be in the weeds quite a lot to make that work. But they also have to be a really good strategic communicator with the senior leadership team and with stakeholders kind of up and down the business to help people ideate ways in which data can drive value. And it's rare to find a CDO who's truly good at both of those things. And that's one of the reasons why people struggle in the role. And it's also a reason why, as we get into our AI conversation, CDOs are so interested by these new developments in AI because they have attracted the attention of exactly the sort of people that the CDO wants to please. The CEOs, CFOs, CIOs are all very excited, and so there's a bandwagon there that many CDOs are strongly interested in jumping on.
So with those two different skill sets, do you think that's something that CDOs have to learn moving into this role? So I suppose if you're talking younger leaders in terms of experience in these types of leadership roles, is it the skill set they have to learn in order to influence data within a business, or do you think it should be more inherent to their skill set?
No, it is a learned skill for sure. One of the CDOs usually come up from sort of one of two paths. They might come up from having been on the kind of delivery and technology side of the work, sort of managing data platforms and managing data engineering and so on. Those kinds of CDOs do absolutely have to learn how to romance what they're doing and put that in terms that the business can get excited about. The other kinds of CDOs are people who maybe more come from the business, and they then understand the sort of business needs very well. Where they have a challenge is to understand the complexity of execution against those business requirements. So on the one hand, you have CDOs who know all the cool things that could be done, but struggle to communicate that to the business, and the other you have people who know what the business needs but struggle to figure out whether that's practical. So it's learning in both directions, though, for sure.
Definitely, and I suppose I've noticed this in the recruitment world as well for these types of positions, where there seems to be a larger focus now than there ever has been on aligning data to value within organisations. What do you think has contributed to that that dynamic shift over the last couple of years, maybe?
I think it's a little bit of impatience um, in C-suite sort of boardroom type environments where a lot of money has been spent on data infrastructure, on this kind of kind of I call it the field of dreams approach. Where, if you build it, they will come,
Yeah,
um, and and so just building giant data lakes and sort of setting people out on boats on the lakes, as it were, and say just fish and cool stuff will come, is a pretty outdated approach at this point. I think it's got its sort of last shot in the arm with COVID because organizations are like, okay, we have the chance to do some digital transformations, some technology investments, and so on, and that's cool. But now, quite rightly, people are saying, okay, where is the real, where's the business value coming from? And it requires, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a thing that requires, as organizations go through their journey with data, requires different profile in the CDO role. So if an organization does have a very immature core platform, they're just really not managing their data to make it available to people, then it is hard to drive any value if you don't fix some of those things foundationally. So the CDO to fix that might be quite a sort of execution focused technical individual. Whereas later on, a as the organization really does need somebody to help them ideate use cases on the back of that data, then they need somebody who's more around advanced analytics and sort of business understanding. So that might be a different person, and you see that in the sort of the turnover of CDOs within the role. And some of that, some of that is unfortunate. People get turfed out of roles and so on, but some of it's kind of necessary and even a good thing as the organization's needs for that leadership change in terms of its profile.
Definitely. And we've spoken about this previously in our conversations, but I suppose it's led rise to the fractional CDO, where people are coming in and working for that tenure. Like you said, when you do go through transformational change, the CDO you start with at point A might not be the CDO that you need once you've finished and got to point B and you're on to the next project. Do you think that's how the CDO role might evolve moving forward? I suppose what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think certainly sort of interim and fractional approaches can be really helpful, both in terms of accessing a level of expertise that an organization might not be able to sort of pay for full time, in terms of the sort of fractional approach, and that's some of the some of the kind of work that I do. And then similarly, on the interim side, a CDO who comes in and knows that they're there for a year to build something um, can be a very powerful change agent because they don't have to worry about feathering the nest and building a power base for the next 5 years sort of thing. They can just get stuff done, and in the knowledge that they're going to hand over to somebody who will carry that baton forward to sort of the next phase of development. So I think those are more relevant than they ever have been. And I've said it before, and it's a bit controversial when you say it in the CDO kind of context, that the very best organizations or the very most data mature organizations may not need a CDO at all. Because if they don't need somebody to champion the use of data and to wrangle everybody into actually bothering to look at the numbers, etc., then maybe they just need somebody who can run the data team operationally, and everything else is taken care of by enlightened execs. But I think for the time being, a CDO is necessary still to drive that cultural change.
And I suppose it would be necessary across the wider economy and market for a long time. Because obviously, I think we often forget how most businesses don't have a level of data maturity necessarily, that when compared to the big players, Microsofts, the Googles, and everyone else, which you take as the most common examples. So obviously the role will be needed in those firms as they scale up. Do you think there might ever be a point where the CDO becomes, I suppose we're thinking of like an end point of this journey where they become, I don't want to say irrelevant, but to the point where you sort of worked yourself out of a job in a sense of where everyone is where they need to be in terms of data. In an ideal world, obviously it's not never going to work out that way, but I suppose this is more of a theory than anything else.
I think it's no. I think it absolutely is. It absolutely is possible, and or it might be that that an organization, their CDO becomes, as I was saying a minute ago, maybe more of an operational role, and um, uh, I think organizations have made a lot of progress in understanding how you need to bring the principles of, for example, sort of DevOps and CI/CD into the world of data, and so a day-to-day leader who can run a tight ship, and build out core value and do things like governance and data management and so on effectively, working with, as I say, enlightened stakeholders, maybe what the role ends up sort of mostly being. But as you rightly say, there's still plenty of organizations where, and I speak to quite a lot of these kinds of organizations where they're doing data, kind of who isn't at this point, but they don't have any operational model around it. They don't know what their data team does. Maybe they don't even have a proper data team. They don't know what that relationship between that team is and the rest of the organization, etc. So defining that and defining the data function within an organization is a key thing that CDOs can be doing right now, I think.
Definitely, and I suppose it would also include changing circumstances in the wider business landscape. And AI obviously is the topic of this conversation. So we talked about the CDO and now moving into AI. That might play a part in that as well. So So moving on to the next question, I mean, how will AI add value to organizations, do you think?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned at the top of our conversation, I mean, AI has been adding value to organizations for years now. One of the original godfathers of AI, John McCarthy, back in the 50s or 60s, who really helped coin the term, defined AI as anything a computer can do that it didn't used to be able to do, which is a pretty broad definition. And if you think about it, people today sort of say, oh, well, AI is computers doing things that historically humans were able to do. Well, humans have been able to add numbers together for a long time. We did not, I don't remember anybody saying that a pocket calculator was artificial intelligence. But if you want to sort of, if we use the sort of somewhat more useful working definition of AI being particularly sort of self-learning systems, machine learning, a key sort of methodological component of AI, then as I say, people have been using AI for things like image recognition, prediction, failure prediction for transport networks, or for gas distribution, or things like ad targeting, creative optimization, all of these things where you're automating some level of decision making. Those are all AI applications and have been delivering value, particularly in what I would call sort of fairly quantitative contexts for quite a while. So most of the AI we've seen up till now has been to do with structured data. So as I was saying, Microsoft, we were using it to make product recommendations to Xbox players based upon their previous play history. And instead of having some human have to sit through all that information, we had a machine do it, and thus it was artificial intelligence. But the data was quite structured. The big wave, of course, we're seeing now in the last sort of 18 months has been much more focused around unstructured data, textual data, image data, audio, video, and in particular, of course, the ability to generate content, not just make decisions and recognize content. And so many organizations that have a strong quantitative element to their business, for example, media companies, retailers, insurers, financial services companies, they've been doing machine learning and AI on their numbers, should we say, for a long time. Now, generative AI opens up opportunities for companies which are more about unstructured data, which again, funny enough, the other side of the media company's business and their actual content. But organizations like law firms, consulting firms, any organization that deals in unstructured content, which of course for any large organization is a whole chunk of what they do day to day around the documents they create, the knowledge that they have, and knowledge management and enterprise search have been floating around for years and have always been a struggle. And as organizations have created more and more content, we all experience the sort of, if you work in a big company, the sort of cursed answer you get. You say, where's this information? Somebody says it's on SharePoint, and you're like, oh God, I've got 2 hours of searching SharePoint ahead of me trying to make sense of some crazy folder system that somebody created. And there's a substantial potential benefit of just sort of automating information discovery within an organization and helping to use that to shortcut to sort of synthesizing the unstructured data that people have. And as a result, these new applications are attracting the attention of not just the CDO, but other teams within the organization, the CIO, the CTO, CMOs. They all see the opportunity, I think, with automating the creation and synthesis of unstructured data.
And I suppose any type of product that you create internally could also be used to sell externally, depending on what business you are as well, in terms of the automation. But I think there's also a governance issue. You don't know what on that SharePoint, what are in the sort of dark recesses of that data, sort of lurking in the wings. So it's good to know. And I like your example of the calculator as well, and sort of, because I think that's where, and I would agree that AI is best utilized. It's not necessarily a replacement, but just a time saver and an augmentation to something that we're already doing. Do you think that could change in the future? So I know I mean, obviously the AI conversation always ends up with AGI, but do you think that would, how far that, how far off that is, or if it has any value, or anything like that in the future?
Well, I think, yeah, there's obviously been a lot of discussion about this in the last few years. Everything from um, self-driving cars to um, so, automated, to chatbots that are promising free travel for bereaved families when no such policy exists, and so on. I think people, and I thought it was very interesting the branding choice that Microsoft made for what started out as Bing Chat, and then now is known as Copilot. And I think that name is very telling, and I think it's a good choice because what it says is, okay, this is a digital co-pilot, somebody who rides with you, who augments your own capabilities, so makes your own, makes you more effective in what you're doing. That is not a replacement for you, and even in the of course, we've all seen this, this incredibly kind of compressed hype cycle in the last 12 months on this, where even 12 months ago, everybody was like, "Oh my God, the machines are coming for our jobs," and even now, I think people are realizing that it's more about how we have these people ride, these systems ride along with us. So, to your example of pulling data from a corporate, from a SharePoint environment to, I don't know, answer a client brief if you're a consulting firm. So, great use case. Well, you'd be insane just to sort of put the client brief into the machine and say, don't come back to me, just email a response straight back to the client. Nobody's going to do that. And you want to have eyes on it so that you can see whether it's saying the right things and not using data that you shouldn't it shouldn't use, or say mentioning another client name that it shouldn't mention, and so on. So I think it's very much going to be kind of these kind of co-pilot, these assisted scenarios which drive the most value and balance the opportunities with the risks as well. But there will be plenty of commie-tragic stories of people sort of over-automating with this, and then crazy things happening when they realize that they do need a human in the loop for quite a lot of these scenarios.
And especially for data governance, I think as well, issues and sort of security issues. If you're giving your AI access to a lot of sensitive information, it can't always tell, or depending on the parameters that you set it. But I suppose in terms of the CDO, how do they make their role indispensable within a business, and does AI play a part in that as well?
Yeah, and again, I mean, most CDOs have been, again, in terms of the sort of the quantitative side of AI, decision automation, and so on. A lot of organizations that are sort of fairly data mature have been doing that for a while, and it's often the CDO who's been responsible for a lot of that work. The unstructured data opportunity with generative AI creates an interesting sort of opportunity and challenge for CDOs. And as I mentioned, when I wrote about this in my blog post, I think to some extent it depends on the kind of organization, because if you're a CDO in an organization that is strongly kind of quantitative in what it's doing, you've probably got your hands plenty full with, I don't know, so, retail store optimization, supply chain optimization, whatever it might be, message targeting for marketing campaigns, or various other things. And it may well be that that generative AI, which uh, is a sort of unlocks a sort of use cases that might make a CIO very interested in terms of internal knowledge usage and so on. Might be something the CDO can have a good partnership with the CIO on. And some CDOs report to the CIO, so in that case, even easier. Um, uh, and with again with the CDO probably leveraging their experience around sort of governance and policy and privacy, which are topics that need to be taken very seriously in this context. In some other organizations where the CDO's historical role is more about unstructured data, say a law firm, then we might see them legitimately getting involved with generative AI more directly, because the sort of company's business is about content. So I think it will vary. I don't think CDOs should be either trying to grab the whole thing because that's overreach, or sort of having their hands off completely. It's a foundational capability that I think will underpin a number of different kind of executions within the organization. So the CDO can be a sort of part of that.
Do you think other chief roles, so CIO, CTO, even a chief product officer might want their hands on the sort of the AI piece, depending on what you want to do with it. But do you think they would put enough emphasis on things like governance and security? So obviously, it's very part of the CDO's remit in terms of what they do for the business. And I would argue it's very important as you're scaling AI, because data and AI are very interlinked. So do you think they will have that as a focus if AI does fall under remits outside of the CDO?
I think if they don't have it, they will need to acquire it pretty quickly. There may be some shocks there if an enterprising sort of product leader, for example, wants to use a whole bunch of company knowledge to, for example, and then automate a support chat or something, and all of a sudden they are dealing with data that may, in that example, be considered sort of personal data for the employees of the company and under a GDPR kind of rubric. So I think one of the things CDOs will have to be alive to is the possibility that they'll suddenly get a call and something's about to go live, and they, suddenly legal has taken a look over it and said, what's the privacy policy, or what's the governance on this, and cause them to have to pick up the phone to the CDO and say, well, can you quickly fix this? And the CDO rolls their eyes out their head and says, okay, well, give me a couple of people, I can extend the team and so on. And hopefully that, obviously every CDO is different. Some people live for governance and sort of process management. It's not my favorite thing, and so if that were me, I would be a little disappointed that some other team gets to do the interesting bit, and I just get to sort of do the housekeeping behind the scenes. But certainly it's part of the part of the picture that will need to be important for those solutions for sure.
Would you say the CDO should always take a lead on any type of AI? So although it might sit under a CIO's remit, the CDO should be the one actually leading the ship, so to speak, on and then can apply things like governance and security to it, as well as sort of developing the product.
I don't think it's practical for the CDO to take a lead on every potential implementation of AI within an organization. What I think the CDO can do is be a great source of knowledge about what is possible and some of the practical considerations, again, particularly around sort of governance and management and so on. But for example, an organization where, again, to use the sort of the product example, an organization that wants to use generative capabilities to build for example, an ad tech firm building an ad builder that wants to use generative capabilities in the ad builder. Um, well, unless the CDO's got an incredibly tight relationship with the chief product officer, having them sort of stick their nose into that sort of piece of feature design feels like overreach for the CDO. On the other hand, if that feature is using um, any sort of structured data that the CDO is responsible for and so on, and that's an opportunity to have a good partnership there around using that data responsibly. But also the CDO might be in a position to say, okay, well look, we're running a foundational um, generative service within the organization, so you can call that, rather than spinning up your own service and so on. There's a lot of implementation considerations, again, around making sure that you have good sort of data sovereignty within the organization that the CDO can contribute. But I think it's going to pop up in a bunch of different places. And that's the thing, product teams will want to use it, marketing teams will want to use it. Um, uh, Certainly the CIO, CTO teams are going to want to use it for internal purposes. And I think it's a stretch for the CDO to be at the center of all of those things.
I agree. Yeah, again, it's all dependent on how you use it, I suppose, in the business, which probably needs to be defined first before you start wading
Yes.
into the AI waters. I mean,
Yeah.
what do you think are your predictions of how this C-suite fight almost is going to play out?
Well, despite the sort of the framing of my post on this, um, I'm hopeful that it won't be too much of a scrap in the ring for most organisations who are reasonably enlightened. I think what we'll see is generative generative services. We're speaking about that specific sort of brand of AI. Um, well, one of the important things about generative AI is that unlike running your own machine learning models, um, you're kind of having to buy it as a cloud service from somebody or buy in and run the algorithms and so on. It's not something that you can just completely kind of build and train on your own in most cases. And so for most organizations, I mean, yes, um, there are open source models out there, Lambda from Meta, for example. But most organizations are going to want to essentially rent a model from one of the cloud providers and then augment it with their own data. And that feels an awful lot more like the sort of thing that the CIO or CTO would manage as a foundational cloud service for the business, rather than something that the CDO would run as a data application. Particularly given that it has applications outside of the sort of traditional sort of analytics and AI that a CDO would own. So I think what will happen in many orgs is that there'll be this foundational service that the data team can tap into, as well as other teams, and there will be some tussling about policy on using that, and who gets to decide what use cases are acceptable and so on. And I think smart CDOs will take the opportunity to, going back to what we were saying at the very beginning of our chat, will use the opportunity to be sort of ideator in chief for how these kinds of technologies can benefit the business. So to go around and help sort of frame out use cases, even if they're not going to be directly involved in the implementation, so that because they understand the power of data blending structured data with unstructured data. Not all of these use cases are purely about just munging a bunch of documents. There's a bunch of crossover use cases, and so for the CEO to be able to have that leadership position. And I am seeing organizations start to advertise for chief data and AI officers. And I think the reality of that will be that these will be people who are CDOs, but with this sort of AI advisory brief sort of bolted on.
Do you think there's room for on the C-suite board, as well as within these functions that you're describing, Do you think there's room for a chief AI officer, for example, so actually removing data completely and just focusing purely on AI? I suppose these would, as a preface, these will probably be only for businesses that are really pushing into AI. I think most businesses it wouldn't apply to, but for those businesses that qualify, I suppose. But do you think it would be there'd be room there?
I think there might be. I, I would raise an eyebrow at any organization that has a chief data officer and a chief AI officer,
Hmm.
um, just simply because I think that there's too much overlap between those two roles. Um, but what we might see, again, kind of touching on what we were saying earlier about will the CDO role go away, is it might be that the CDO role becomes a chief AI officer role, where that that definition is interpreted somewhat broadly to include the sort of various kinds of analytics and advanced analytics and machine learning and AI. So it's not just this narrow definition. Um, and where the kind of the more sort of foundational platformy bits of the CDO role, if you like, are taken care of um, by the CIO, for example. I don't know if I would recommend an organization do that. They'd have to be pretty data mature. But an CIO who is, again, championing those use cases and the governance and AI ops, which we haven't touched on really, but is this whole process around making sure that the AI systems you build don't degrade over time and don't do terrible things and don't make promises they can't keep and so on. All of that stuff will keep an AI officer, busy, plenty busy,
Hmm.
if they've got a good sort of technology team to partner with.
Especially if I suppose if you're putting an AI product into the sociological world where it's now open to us as in humans, feeding it with
Yes.
all sorts of prompts
Yeah.
and data and everything else, and that's where things start to go a little bit off kilter, I suppose, with some of the examples that you mentioned earlier, as well as sort of I think there's one in DWP as well, where they all of these sorts of things start to happen. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting. I suppose you think that the CDO role, it seems almost internal advisory is where it might, which is sort of where it already is at the moment, but AI might push that further down the line where their CDO, so I'm understanding correctly, is going to be advising on AI within the business, but not directly in control of AI.
Yeah, I think it will. I think it will be a blend. I mean, I think there will
Mm.
be some AI. There will be AI applications that the CDO is running, but as I say, partly because they're becoming already so infused into the tool chains that we already use that it would be almost possible for them not to. Um, so I wouldn't want to kind of cast it that CDO will only have an advisory role on AI. I think it might be just more of a kind of a plus plus in that the CDO will be delivering a range of AI value in their own world, and then um, helping with a sort of expertise and knowledge around some of these, as you say, some of these more kind of sociological impacts and other kind of policy impacts for other, with other teams looking to do, looking to use the same kind of stuff themselves. And in the same way that currently a CDO or their team, and depends on the organization, but they may be doing some um, sort of analytics and sort of endpoint value delivery themselves, building reports or doing analysis for their sort of stakeholder teams. But also, I think a good data team is also looking to kind of upskill those stakeholder teams so they can become more self-sufficient in the future. And we could see a kind of an AI version of that, so that the CDO is championing sort of AI culture change and cultural awareness within the broader organization.
I agree, and I think AI probably has the same difficulties that data had in terms of its first inception, where you do have to change hearts and minds a little bit within businesses, win people over, and obviously that is traditionally formed under the role of the CDO. But thank you very much. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure and fantastically informative as well in terms of this insight into the C-suite and AI. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak today on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Eric. It's great to join you.
Amazing. Well, hopefully we can even do a maybe a catch up later down the line, so maybe 2 years in, seeing how the landscape has changed since our last conversation, and you might have things. Obviously, things are being released and changing at such a rapid rate that it might be a whole new conversation on the future of AI and where it fits within the C-suite's remit.
Yeah, that's the only problem with recording a podcast like this and making predictions is that 2 years from now you'll be able to say, "Look, you said this was going to happen, but it didn't." And I'll be like, "Yeah, okay."
Yeah, maybe we could do a
You
breakdown
should,
so I can
yeah,
yeah,
my
add this
future
to this
predictions are not to
podcast.
be taken, over seriously. But no, I'm happy to. Yeah, it'd be great to revisit this topic as the world figures it out for you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ian.
Thanks, Eric.